Story 1. The night air was thick with the scent of bonfire smoke and the distant laughter of my friends as I stepped away from the party. I could still hear the music thumping behind me, but the allure of the open road called louder. It was just a short hitchhike home, I reassured myself. What could possibly go wrong? As I stood by the roadside, the streetlights flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the pavement. I pulled my sweater tighter around me, the chill of the night seeped in, but it was more than just the temperature that sent a shiver down my spine. I had heard the whispers, the stories of girls who disappeared while hitchhiking, the so-called Santa Rosa girls. But those were just tales, right? Nothing more than urban legends to scare naive college students like me. Come on, I murmured to myself, raising my thumb to the next passing car. The headlights glared, momentarily blinding me, then vanished into the distance. I felt a pang of disappointment. I wasn't afraid, not yet. I just wanted to get home. A few minutes later, a rusty pickup slowed down beside me. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap, leaned over to roll down the window. "Where you headed, kid?" "Just to the college," I said, flashing a friendly smile to mask my unease. "I'm Sarah." "Get in, Sarah." "I'm Tom." He gestured to the passenger seat, and hesitation flickered through my mind. I could see the mess of fast food wrappers and empty soda cans strewn across the dashboard. Still, I told myself I was being ridiculous. As I climbed in, I noted the smell of stale cigarettes mixed with something sweet and sickly. "Thanks for stopping," I said, trying to keep the mood light. "No problem. It's a quiet night out here." He glanced at me, his eyes lingering a moment too long. "You go to school around here?" "Yeah, just started my sophomore year," I replied, forcing a casual tone. "What about you? You live nearby?" "Just passing through, really. I work odd jobs here and there." His voice was gravelly, and something about it unsettled me. I glanced out the window, watching the darkened streets whiz by. "Nice area," I said, desperate to fill the silence. "I love living in Santa Rosa. Lots to do." "Sure, if you stay away from the wrong crowds," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "You know, girls like you shouldn't be hitchhiking alone. It's dangerous out here." My heart raced at his words, a knot forming in my stomach. "I know, but sometimes you have to take risks, right?" "Risks can get you in trouble," he replied, his smile fading as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Like those girls, the ones who went missing." I felt my skin crawl. "What do you mean?" "Oh, girls who think they're invincible. They vanish without a trace," he said, his tone casual, but there was an edge to his words. "You wouldn't want to be one of them, would you?" "Of course not," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But that's just rumors, right? Rumors can be based on truth. You should be careful, sweetheart." He glanced at me again, and for a moment, I felt like prey caught in a predator's gaze. Just then, the truck turned down a dimly lit road and my heart raced. Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a shortcut," he said, but the way he said it sent alarm bells ringing in my head. The trees loomed closer on either side, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. "Maybe I should get out here," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. "What?" "We're almost there," he replied, his tone shifting, becoming almost menacing. I had to think fast. "I left my phone at the party. I really need to go back and get it." He chuckled softly, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "You don't need your phone. You'll be fine with me." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air, and I realized I had stepped into something far darker than I had anticipated. My mind raced as I searched for a way out. I needed to act, fast. The sun hung low in the Santa Rosa sky, casting a golden hue across the campus as I walked with Jessica, my closest friend and confidant. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, but an unsettling tension simmered beneath our light-hearted conversation. I could tell that Jessica had something on her mind, her brow furrowed with concern. "Sarah, you really need to stop hitchhiking," she said, her voice firm yet laced with a hint of fear. "Have you heard about the girls who went missing? It's not safe out there." I chuckled, trying to dismiss the worry that crept into my mind. "Oh, come on, Jess. I've hitched rides a million times. I know the risks, but I'm careful. Besides, it's just a ride home." She stopped walking and turned to face me, her eyes wide with urgency. "Just last month, a girl from the next town over disappeared after getting a ride. They found her backpack by the side of the road, and that was it. No sign of her. You can't keep brushing this off." I could see the fear etched on her face, and for a moment, I felt a pang of dread ripple through me. "I'll be okay," I reassured her, although my voice lacked conviction. "I'll stick to the main roads and only get in with people who seem normal." "Normal?" she scoffed, her voice rising. "What does that even mean anymore? You hear these stories and the truth is, you never really know who you're getting into a car with. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? I sighed, rolling my eyes, but the unease lingered. I promise, Jess. I'll be careful. I'm just trying to save time, that's all. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whispers of danger floated through my mind, but I pushed them aside, eager to live my life without fear. Later that evening, I found myself at a party, the music blaring and laughter echoing in the air. But Jessica's words clung to me like a shadow, darkening my carefree spirit. Meanwhile, Detective Mark Thompson sat in his cramped office, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. The walls were adorned with photos of the missing girls, their smiles haunting him as he flipped through their case files. Each one was a reminder of the heavy burden he carried. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of their family's anguish pressing down on him. Another day, another heartbroken family, he muttered to himself, staring at the latest victim's photograph. The girl had been so vibrant, full of life, until she wasn't. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was losing the battle against time. With each passing day, hope faded for those left behind. Detective Thompson? A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. It was a family member, a mother whose daughter had gone missing weeks ago. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and he could see the desperation etched on her face. Detective, please. I need to know if you found anything. I can't sleep, I can't eat. It feels like I'm losing her all over again, she pleaded, her voice trembling. I'm doing everything I can, ma'am, he replied, his tone steady despite the turmoil inside him. We're following every lead. I promise you, I won't stop until we find her. Thank you, she whispered, stepping back into the shadows as he buried his face in his hands, wondering how many more families would be shattered before this nightmare ended. At the same time, Linda was deep into her research, her fingers flying over the typewriter keys. She was determined to uncover the truth behind the disappearances. There has to be a connection, she murmured to herself, surrounded by a chaotic array of notes and clippings. The more she dug, the more she began to see a disturbing pattern. She paused, lifting her head to glance at the wall covered in photos and notes. 3 girls, all last seen in the same area, all disappeared without a trace. What are you hiding? She whispered to the silent images as if they could answer her. As the night deepened, the weight of fear settled over Santa Rosa, a community on edge haunted by the specter of the missing girls. Little did we know that our paths would soon intertwine in ways we could never have imagined, each of us drawn into the heart of this chilling mystery, where trust was a luxury we could no longer afford. I was sitting in my dimly lit dorm room, the glow from my desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls, when my phone buzzed insistently. I glanced down to find a message from an unknown number. Instinctively, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The text read, "Please be careful hitchhiking. Stay safe. We need you." Who sent this? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Was it a prank? Or something more sinister? I tossed my phone onto the bed, my heart pounding. The recent disappearances of young women had made the air in Santa Rosa thick with dread. Just last week, Jessica had begged me not to hitchhike again after sharing the story of a girl who vanished without a trace. You can't just ignore the warning signs, Sarah. It's dangerous out there, she had urged, her eyes wide with concern. I had brushed it off, thinking I was invincible, but now I found myself questioning everything. Sarah, you okay? My roommate Lisa poked her head into my room, her brow furrowed. You look like you've seen a ghost. I picked up my phone and waved it in front of her. Just got this creepy message from an unknown number. It's probably nothing, but... I trailed off, my voice faltering as the weight of the recent events settled over me like a heavy blanket. Maybe it's a sign, she suggested, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. You should seriously reconsider hitchhiking. It's not worth the risk. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know, but I need to get home this weekend. Buses are too expensive, and I've already missed too many classes. Then maybe just ask someone in our dorm for a ride. You don't have to do this alone. I nodded slowly, but the thought of being trapped in a car with someone I didn't know still made me uneasy. I'll think about it, I replied, forcing a smile. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Mark Thompson leaned against his desk, staring at the latest report on the missing girls. The room was cluttered with files, remnants of cases that haunted him like ghosts. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the headache that had become a near-constant companion since the first victim was reported. Detective, a voice called from the doorway. It was Officer Morales, a fresh-faced recruit eager to prove himself. I think I've found something you should see. Thompson straightened, intrigued. What is it? There was a witness who spotted a suspicious vehicle near the last known location of one of the girls. A blue van parked for an unusual amount of time. Did they get a license plate? Not sure. We're still following up, but they mentioned a man who seemed to be watching the girls get into their rides. A flicker of hope ignited within Thompson. Let's check it out. Maybe this will lead us to something. As they gathered their things, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Each passing day brought new fears, and with every girl that went missing, the community's panic intensified. Meanwhile, Linda sat at her cluttered desk, her fingers dancing across the typewriter as she prepared her next article. She was determined to expose the lack of urgency from local authorities. This is getting ridiculous, she muttered to herself, frustration bubbling over. She picked up the phone and dialed the police station, her heart racing. Detective Thompson, please. It's Linda, the journalist. After a brief pause, she heard his voice on the other end. Linda, what can I do for you? Mark, we need to talk. There's a growing fear in the community, and I don't think the police are doing enough to address it. These girls deserve more than just a few articles in the paper. Look, I get it, but we're doing everything we can. Every lead is being followed up, he replied, tension evident in his tone. Every lead? Really? Because it doesn't feel like it. Parents are scared, and I think you need to be more vocal about this. Hold a press conference or something. Do you know how that would look? We're working in the background, and I can't just throw everything out there without solid evidence. Mark, if you don't start treating this like the emergency it is, you might lose more than just public trust. He sighed heavily, the weight of her words sinking in. I'll consider it, but I can't make any promises. As Linda hung up the phone, she felt a mix of determination and desperation. She was going to get to the bottom of this no matter the cost. The shadows loomed larger in Santa Rosa, and she could almost feel the danger creeping closer with each passing moment. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets of Santa Rosa. I stood at the edge of my campus, clutching my notebook, determined to document my hitchhiking experiences. My heart raced as I thought about the girls who had disappeared, their faces haunting my mind like ghosts. I could feel the weight of the stories pressing down on me, and I wanted to ensure that their voices were not silenced. Sarah, are you really going to do this? Jessica's voice broke through my thoughts. She had become my constant anchor, but I could see the worry etched on her face as she approached me. I have to, Jess, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. If I can just gather enough information, maybe I can help someone avoid the same fate. She shook her head, her brow furrowed. You're putting yourself in danger by hitchhiking. What if the driver turns out to be another monster? I sighed, the reality of my choices washing over me. I know it's risky, but I can't just sit back and do nothing. I want to warn others. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? Promise, I said, though a part of me felt the weight of that promise pressing down. With that, I ventured out to the main road, my heart racing with each passing car. I took a deep breath and lifted my thumb, hoping to catch a ride. The first 2 cars whizzed by, indifferent to my plight. I jotted down notes in my notebook, detailing my thoughts, the time, and the make of each passing vehicle. As the minutes dragged on, I felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. A white pickup truck slowed to a stop in front of me. The driver, a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and an unsettling smile, leaned out the window. Need a ride, sweetheart? He asked, his voice dripping with a condescending tone. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to refuse. Where are you headed? Just down the road, I can take you wherever you need to go, he replied, but something in his eyes told me I shouldn't trust him. Thanks, but I think I'll wait for someone else, I said, forcing a polite smile. Suit yourself, he grumbled, pulling away. The next car was a small sedan driven by a woman in her late 20s. She smiled warmly as I approached. Where are you headed? Just to the college, I replied, feeling a wave of relief as I slid into the passenger seat. We chatted amiably during the ride, and I felt a sense of normalcy wash over me. You know, it's brave of you to hitchhike, she said, glancing at me with a curious expression. A lot of people wouldn't dare. I'm just trying to be cautious, I replied, choosing my words carefully. I've heard some stories about girls going missing around here. Her smile faded slightly. Yeah, it's scary. I can't believe it's happening in our town. As we neared the campus, I felt a sense of unease creep back in. Thank you for the ride, I said, grateful to be out of the car. Stay safe, okay? She said, her voice softening as I stepped out. I nodded and watched her drive away, my heart still racing. I flipped open my notebook and jotted down the details of the ride, the woman's description, and my thoughts on our conversation. Each entry felt like a tiny victory against the background of fear that had settled over Santa Rosa. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Mark Thompson sat in his dimly lit office, sifting through files of the missing girls. The faces stared back at him, each one a reminder of his failures. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, the weight of the unsolved cases heavy on his heart. "Damn it," he muttered to himself. "I can't let this happen again." He rifled through a folder that contained the name of a local man, Greg Mitchell, who had a disturbing history. "There's got to be something here," he murmured as he scanned the pages. A few notes caught his eye, eyewitness accounts that placed Mitchell near the last known location of one of the victims. "Why can't I find any solid proof?" he growled in frustration, slamming the folder shut. Just then his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a tip from an anonymous source, hinting that the killer might be someone close to the victims. This could change everything, he breathed, a mix of hope and dread flooding through him. As I continued my documentation, the weight of the town's fear settled heavily in my chest. I knew I was just a student trying to help, but I also felt the shadows closing in, the danger lurking just outside my perception. And as I scribbled down my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Each car that passed felt like a reminder of the risks I was taking. "Stay safe, Sarah," I whispered to myself, my voice trembling slightly with the weight of what lay ahead. I could feel the chill in the air as I stood by the roadside, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and dread. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the pavement, and I was acutely aware of the stories I had heard about girls like me who had vanished without a trace. Yet, the thrill of the open road called to me, a siren song that drowned out the warnings echoing in my mind. As I stuck my thumb out, I tried to shake off the apprehension. A beat-up blue pickup truck pulled over and I felt a flicker of hope. "Hey there," the driver said, grinning. He looked to be in his late 30s with tousled brown hair and a scruffy beard. "Need a lift?" "Yeah, thanks," I replied, sliding into the passenger seat. "I'm just trying to get back to campus." The engine roared to life and we pulled away from the curb. At first it felt like any other ride. He made small talk, asking about my studies. "What are you majoring in?" he asked, glancing at me with a casual interest. "Psychology," I replied, relaxing slightly. "I'm really interested in understanding how people think and behave." "Interesting choice," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You must have a lot of theories about people." I chuckled, but soon that light banter took a turn. I noticed his grip tightening on the steering wheel as we drove deeper into the outskirts of Santa Rosa. "You know," he said slowly, "there are some crazy people out there. You hitchhikers should be careful." "Yeah, I've heard," I said cautiously, sensing a shift in his tone. "But it's usually fine. Most drivers are nice." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You really think so? What if one of those nice drivers has a dark side?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just saying," he replied, his smile fading. "You never really know who you're getting into a car with." The air in the cab turned heavy, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I could sense that something was off, but I tried to play it cool. "Can you just drop me off at the next stop?" I said, forcing a casual tone. "I think I left my phone at the last place I was." He glanced at me, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Why rush? We're having a good conversation here." My heart raced as I realized I needed to act fast. "I really need to go. Just the next stop, please?" I pressed, my voice trembling ever so slightly. "Are you scared of me?" he asked, his tone shifting to something more menacing. "You're not one of those girls who get scared too easily, are you?" "Of course not," I said, trying to sound confident. Suddenly he swerved the truck onto a narrow dirt road lined with trees and panic surged through me. "Where are we going?" I demanded, gripping the seat. "Just a little detour," he said, smirking. "No harm in exploring, right?" I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. My mind raced with thoughts of escape. "Look, I'm sorry if I upset you. Just let me out and I won't bother you again," I pleaded, my voice rising. He laughed again, but it was hollow. "You think it's that easy? You think you can just get out whenever you want?" In that moment, I knew I had to make my move. I looked around, scanning for anything I could use. As he turned to glare at me, I reached for the door handle, flinging it open. The truck was still moving, but I was determined. With a surge of courage, I leaped out, rolling onto the gravel road. Pain shot through my shoulder as I hit the ground, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, but I didn't dare look back. I sprinted down the dirt road, the trees closing in around me, branches scratching my arms. After what felt like an eternity, I burst back onto the main road, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached a gas station, my legs trembling beneath me. I stumbled inside and the attendant looked up, alarmed. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I need to call the police," I gasped, my voice shaking. "Now." I stumbled out of that car, my heart racing like a wild horse in a stampede. My hands trembled as I gripped my bag tightly, the memory of the driver's erratic behavior still fresh in my mind. The streetlights flickered like they were trying to warn me, casting eerie shadows on the ground. I knew I had to get to the police station and warn them. Somehow, I felt that what I had just escaped was merely a prelude to something much darker. As I ran, the cold night air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. My mind was consumed with thoughts of the other girls. Jessica, Lisa, all those names that haunted the whispers in our campus halls. I burst through the doors of the police station, gasping for breath. The officer at the desk looked up, startled by my sudden entrance. "Is there a Detective Thompson here?" I panted, urgency spilling from my voice. Yeah, he's in the back," the officer replied, confused. I didn't wait for him to finish his sentence. I darted past the desk, ignoring the curious stares of the officers. I found Detective Thompson hunched over a desk, papers strewn around him like a chaotic storm. He looked up, his brow furrowed in concern. "Sarah? What's wrong?" he asked, standing up quickly. "I just had the most terrifying ride. The driver was acting insane and I paused, catching my breath. "I think he might be connected to the other disappearances." Thompson's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Tell me everything," he urged, gesturing for me to sit. As I relayed my experience, I noticed the flicker of shadows behind him. My breath hitched when I caught sight of a bulletin board filled with photos of the missing women, their faces frozen in time, forever young. It felt surreal, like I was part of a nightmare that was refusing to end. Before I could finish my story, Thompson's phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. He answered quickly, his tone shifting to professional urgency. "Thompson here," he said, listening intently. I could feel a weight pressing down on the air as he listened, his eyes widening incrementally. "Where? Are you sure? I'll be right there." He hung up, his expression darkening. "They found another body, Sarah." My stomach dropped. "Who?" "A girl. She's been linked to someone in the community," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I need you to stay here while I investigate. Don't go anywhere alone." "I won't," I promised, though the weight of dread settled heavily in my chest. Meanwhile, across town, Linda paced her cramped apartment, her mind racing. The latest news about the latest victim sent shockwaves through her. She had been so caught up in her investigation that she hadn't considered how deeply the case could intertwine with her personal life. Then her phone buzzed with a notification, an anonymous tip that sent chills down her spine. The message suggested a connection to her estranged brother, someone she hadn't spoken to in years, someone who had always danced on the edges of legality. "No, it can't be," she whispered to herself, denying the reality that crashed over her like a tidal wave. She threw her phone onto the couch, the screen lighting up with unanswered questions. How could she pursue justice when it meant implicating her own flesh and blood? Throwing on a jacket, she stormed out of her apartment, determination fueling her steps. She had to confront her brother, had to find out if there was any truth to the rumors. As she walked through the dark streets, a sense of foreboding clung to her like a shroud. Could the monster be someone she once loved? Back at the police station, I waited anxiously, my thoughts swirling like a turbulent storm. The reality of the situation hit me hard. Who could I trust? The very fabric of our community was fraying, and the threat was lurking just beneath the surface. I glanced at the bulletin board again and a thought struck me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit idly by while the killer roamed free. "Detective Thompson," I called out as he emerged from the back, his face lined with exhaustion. "I want to help. I can talk to my friends, gather information. Maybe we can piece together what's been happening." He hesitated, considering my words. "It's dangerous, Sarah. I can't protect you if you're out there on your own." "I know the risks," I said, my voice firm. "But I can't just wait. I need to do something." He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but you stay close to me and don't go anywhere alone. We'll figure this out together." As I nodded in agreement, a chilling thought crossed my mind. In a world where trust was a luxury, who could we rely on when the monster hid among us? Story 2. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, each drop a cold reminder of the night's chilling grip. I stood by the roadside, clutching my jacket tighter around me, feeling the dampness seep through. The rhythmic sound of water splashing against the pavement was almost hypnotic, but it did nothing to quell the gnawing anxiety in my stomach. I had been here for nearly an hour, my thumb out, hoping for a ride, but the cars that passed were mere blurs in the darkness. Come on, I muttered to myself, glancing at the empty, desolate stretch of the Interstate 5. Someone has to stop. The thought of being stranded in this rain-soaked hell sent shivers down my spine. I was just a college student trying to make it home after a late study session, but the night felt different, thicker, more oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As if summoned by my thoughts, headlights suddenly pierced the darkness ahead. My heart raced as a nondescript car slowed to a stop beside me. The driver, a man with a friendly smile and tousled hair, leaned over and rolled down the window. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost honeyed. I hesitated. There was something unsettling about him, but the rain was relentless, and the prospect of a warm, dry car was tempting. Yeah. Just to the next exit?" I replied, trying to sound casual as I approached. "Sure thing," he said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Roger, by the way." "Lisa," I said, forcing a smile as I slid into the passenger seat. The interior smelled faintly of cigarettes and something else I couldn't quite place. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I was too far in. I had already made my choice. As we pulled away from the roadside, the tension in the air thickened. I glanced at him, trying to gauge his intentions. "So, where are you headed?" I asked, attempting to fill the silence. "Just driving around, you know? Thought I'd pick up someone on the way," he replied, his eyes flicking to me for a brief moment before returning to the road. The way he said it felt rehearsed, calculated. I nodded, keeping my gaze fixed out the window, the raindrops tracing fleeting paths down the glass. The rhythm of the rain matched the thumping of my heart, each beat echoing in my ears. "It's really coming down out there," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, it can get pretty crazy on these roads," Roger said, his voice now laced with an edge I hadn't noticed before. "You ever hear about the girls that go missing along the I-5? The question sent a chill racing through me, and I turned to look at him, my heart pounding. "No, I haven't," I said, forcing the words out, my mind racing. I wanted to change the subject, to escape the pit of unease that had suddenly opened up in my stomach. "It's a shame, really," he continued, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "They think it's just hitchhiking gone wrong. But you can never be too careful, you know?" I felt the car slow down, the headlights casting eerie shadows across the rain-soaked asphalt. "Yeah, definitely," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The air in the car grew thick with something unspoken. I could sense a shift in his demeanor, his charming facade cracking just enough to reveal the predator lurking beneath. "Don't worry, Lisa," he said, a smirk creeping onto his face. "You're safe with me." But the way he said it sent a jolt of fear through my veins. I could feel his eyes on me, assessing, calculating. "Just a few more minutes, right?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Of course," he replied, his tone too sweet, too calm. I forced myself to breathe, to steady my racing heart, but every instinct screamed at me to escape. As the rain drummed against the roof, I felt the walls of the car closing in, the darkness outside mirroring the dread pooling in my stomach. I was trapped, and the road ahead felt more uncertain than ever. The air was thick with tension as I stepped onto the crime scene, the faint scent of damp earth mingling with the metallic tang of something far more sinister. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The flickering lights of the police cruisers illuminated the area, casting long shadows that danced ominously across the ground. This wasn't just another case, it was a haunting reminder of my own past, one I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. "Detective Lawson," a voice broke through my thoughts. It was Officer Martinez, a young cop with bright eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "Over here." He waved me over to a cluster of officers examining the area where Lisa had disappeared. As I knelt beside the evidence markers, I felt my heart race. Each marker represented a piece of a puzzle that I was determined to solve. "What do we have?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Strange tire tracks leading off the road and some fabric caught on the barbed wire," he replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Looks like it might be from her clothing." I swallowed hard, the image of my sister flashing through my mind. "Do we know if anyone saw her getting into a car?" I asked, scanning the faces of my colleagues. They all looked equally grim, the weight of the case pressing down on us like a lead blanket. "Nothing yet," Martinez said, shaking his head. "The area was pretty quiet that night. But we're still canvassing the neighborhood." I stood and turned my gaze toward the highway, the dark stretch of Interstate 5 looming in the distance. It felt like a predator waiting to pounce, a silent witness to the horrors that unfolded along its stretch. "We need to dig deeper," I muttered. There has to be a connection between the recent disappearances. As I began to pace, a thought struck me. What about the hitchhikers? There's a pattern here. All the victims were last seen trying to catch a ride. Yeah, we've noticed that too, Martinez replied, taking notes on his notepad. But it's not just about the hitchhiking. There's something more unsettling. What do you mean? I asked, my curiosity piqued. There's a rumor going around that some of them were seen getting into the same car, he said, glancing around as if afraid someone might overhear. But no one can identify the driver. It's all hearsay. My mind raced as I considered Martinez's words. What if the driver is someone who blends in, someone who knows how to appear harmless? I could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together, but I needed more information. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life. Detective Lawson, we have a possible lead, the voice of Sergeant Miller broke through. A witness claims to have seen something unusual the night Lisa disappeared. Where is the witness? I asked, my heart pounding with renewed hope. Back at the station. You should come in for the interview, Miller instructed. I exchanged a quick glance with Martinez. Let's go, I said, urgency fueling my steps as I made my way to my car. The detective in me was on high alert, but the sister in me felt a deep-rooted fear. What if this lead didn't pan out? What if Lisa was just another name on a long list of victims? The drive to the station felt like an eternity. My mind raced with thoughts of the witness, what they might have seen, and how it could change everything. As I entered the station, the familiar buzz of activity enveloped me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. Sarah, Miller greeted me as I approached his desk, his expression serious. This witness is pretty shaken up. We need to handle this delicately. Got it? I said, steeling myself for whatever lay ahead. Let's hear what they have to say. As I entered the small interrogation room, I caught sight of a young woman, tears streaking her cheeks, her hands trembling in her lap. I felt a surge of empathy for her. She was just another victim of this nightmare. Thank you for coming, I said softly, pulling up a chair across from her. I know this is hard, but we need to understand what you saw. I don't know if I can, she stammered, her eyes darting toward the door. Take your time, I encouraged, trying to create a safe space for her. You're not alone in this. She took a deep breath, and I could see the internal battle she was fighting. I was driving home that night, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw a car on the side of the road. There was a girl. She was trying to get a ride. And then, I saw him. Who? I pressed gently, my pulse quickening. The driver, she said, her voice trembling. He had this smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was like he was waiting. The chill that ran down my spine was unmistakable. I knew then that this was just the beginning of unraveling the horror that had gripped our community, and I was determined to bring the truth to light, no matter where it led me. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as I stepped into the cramped interrogation room, the air thick with tension. The witness, a young woman named Emily, sat hunched over in her chair, her hands trembling slightly as she fidgeted with the hem of her sweater. I could see the fear etched into her features, the remnants of her trauma lingering in her wide, darting eyes. I knew she was about to recount a story that would send chills down my spine. Miss Johnson? I prompted gently, taking a seat across from her. I know this is difficult, but your account could be vital in our investigation. She nodded slowly, her breath hitching in her throat. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. It was a Saturday night, I was waiting for my friend to pick me up. I didn't think anything of it when a car pulled over. What kind of car was it? I urged, leaning forward, trying to catch every detail. It was a gray sedan, kind of nondescript, you know? Like something you'd forget instantly. She paused, her gaze drifting to the wall as if searching for the right words. He had this smile, but it felt wrong. Like a mask. I could tell there was something off about him. I could feel my heart rate quickening. Did you get a good look at him? Emily shuddered, rubbing her arms as if trying to ward off an invisible chill. He had dark hair, kind of slicked back. And he was wearing this blue jacket. I thought he was just another guy giving a ride. I had no idea. Her voice cracked and she took a deep breath. I was so naive. Take your time, I encouraged, my pen poised over my notepad. What happened next? I got in the car. He started asking me questions about where I was going and I answered him. But then he turned down this deserted road and I could feel my stomach drop. I asked him where we were going and he just kept smiling, but there was something in his eyes. She shook her head, tears welling up. I knew I was in trouble. Did you manage to escape? I felt a mix of dread and hope. If she had made it out, there was a chance for others. Emily's lips trembled as she continued, I did. I remembered I had a friend who lived nearby and I told him I needed to get there. I think he realized I was onto him because he suddenly got angry, his smile vanished. I was terrified but I just kept talking. I told him I didn't want to go home yet, that I wanted to hang out with friends. He hesitated and then, he let me out. She met my gaze, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. I ran. I didn't look back. I just ran. Did you see him again after that? I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. No, she whispered, shaking her head. But I've seen his car around. Each time I feel like I'm being watched. It's like he knows I escaped and he wants to finish what he started. I took a moment to process her words, feeling the weight of her fear settle in the pit of my stomach. Emily, your description. It matches a pattern we're seeing in these cases. This could help us catch him. She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. What if he finds me? What if he comes after me again? I leaned forward, trying to reassure her. We'll do everything we can to keep you safe. You're not alone in this. We're working to track him down, but I need you to stay vigilant. If you see anything suspicious, please call us immediately. As I left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. I had a name, a face, at least that's what I hoped. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized how complex this web of terror had become. Kibbe was slippery, and each moment I spent chasing shadows felt like I was losing ground. Back at my desk, I spread Emily's notes across the surface, poring over each detail. I felt the pressure from the precinct mounting, the media breathing down our necks. I flipped through the files, trying to connect the dots and find a lead, anything that could bring Kibbe into the light. Suddenly, a thought struck me. I rifled through the evidence bag again, this time focusing on the fibers I had overlooked earlier. There, among the evidence, was a piece of fabric caught in the victim's clothing. It was a small detail, but it could be the thread that unraveled Kibbe's entire facade. With renewed determination, I picked up the phone. It was time to get this investigation back on track. The fluorescent lights of the precinct flickered above me as I sat at my desk, the weight of every unsolved case pressing down like a relentless fog. My fingers hovered over the stack of reports, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the harrowing details of the eyewitness account I had just received. I could still see the terror in her eyes, the way her voice trembled when she spoke of Roger Kibbe. Detective Lawson, a voice broke through my thoughts. It was Mark Reynolds, my partner, his brow furrowed in frustration. We need to talk about the evidence. You're chasing shadows here. I looked up, irritation bubbling inside me. Chasing shadows? You heard what she said, Mark. He's out there. He's getting bolder. If we don't act now, we could lose another woman. Mark crossed his arms, a gesture I'd come to recognize as him bracing for a debate. And what evidence do we have? A vague description from a traumatized witness? We need something concrete, something we can take to the DA. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of the old wood echoing in the silence. I know that. But every day that passes, another woman is at risk. We can't afford to wait for the perfect piece of evidence. We have to act. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're not thinking straight, Sarah. You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. You have to keep it together. My heart raced as I felt the fight rise within me. You think I don't know that? You think I'm not aware of the stakes? Every time I close my eyes, I see my sister's face. I see what happens when we let these monsters slip through our fingers. Mark's expression softened slightly, though his skepticism remained evident. I get it, but you have to be careful. You can't let your past dictate your actions. Before I could respond, the phone on my desk rang, cutting through the tension. I snatched it up, my heart pounding. Detective Lawson. Detective, you need to see this, a voice said, urgent and low. I found something. It's about Kibbe. I straightened, my pulse quickening. What did you find? An anonymous letter came in. It's got details about his past, things he's done that might connect him to the recent disappearances. You need to meet me at the coffee shop on 5th. I glanced at Mark, who raised an eyebrow, silently questioning my next move. I'll be there, I said, hanging up. Who was that? Mark asked, his tone shifting to curiosity. Just a tip. I need to follow up on it. He stood there, contemplating. I'll come with you. This isn't something you should tackle alone. As we drove through the urban sprawl of Sacramento, the vibrant city lights blurred into streaks of color, reflecting the chaos of the investigation. I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable energy crackling between us. We arrived at the coffee shop, the smell of burnt coffee and pastries filling my lungs. A figure sat at the back, shrouded in shadows. I approached cautiously, my instincts on high alert. Detective Lawson, the person said, their voice barely above a whisper. I sat down, leaning in. What do you have for me? The figure slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, you'll find information about Roger Kibbe's previous run-ins with the law, things that didn't make it to the public record. I opened the envelope, scanning the contents quickly. My heart sank as I read through the details. There were mentions of previous assaults, a pattern that seemed to emerge. Why are you telling me this? Because if you're going to catch him, you need to know who you're dealing with, the shadowy figure replied. He's not just a killer. He's a predator who knows how to evade the law. You won't find him unless you dig deep. I felt a chill run down my spine as I processed the implications. And you're sure this is accurate? Trust me. I've seen the aftermath of his actions. You need to stop him before it's too late. A knot formed in my stomach. I knew the truth of those words all too well. Thank you, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. As I left the coffee shop with Mark, I could feel the weight of the new information pressing on me. My mind raced with thoughts of Kibbe, the man who had haunted my nightmares and now felt closer than ever. We need to get this to the team, I said, determination flooding my veins. Are you okay? Mark asked, glancing at me with concern. I nodded, though I could feel the tremor in my hands. No more waiting. We're going to find him. But as we drove back to the precinct, a sense of foreboding settled over me. With Kibbe lurking in the shadows, I knew time was running out. The stakes had never been higher, and I would do whatever it took to stop him. The air was thick with tension as my team and I finally pinpointed Kibbe's hideout. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a sinister glow that seemed to echo the unease in my gut. This is it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, as we parked our cars in a secluded area off the beaten path. The rustling leaves and distant sounds of nature felt almost mocking, a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. Are you sure about this, Lawson? Mark asked, skepticism etched on his face. He was always the cautious one, the voice of reason. But I had learned to trust my instincts, and right now they were screaming at me. We have to do this. We can't let him slip away again. With a nod, I motioned for the team to spread out, taking deep breaths to steady my racing heart. My mind raced as I recalled the faces of the victims, their stories etched into my memory like scars. I could almost hear Lisa's frightened voice echoing in my ears, begging for help. I wouldn't let her down. We approached the dilapidated cabin with caution, the wooden boards creaking ominously underfoot. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. On three, I whispered, gripping my flashlight tightly. 1, 2, before I could finish, a sudden movement caught my eye. I turned just in time to see a shadow dart from the back of the cabin. He's here, I shouted, adrenaline surging as I sprinted after the figure disappearing into the trees. Kibbe? The pursuit was frantic. Branches whipped against my face as I maneuvered through the underbrush, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear my team behind me, their footsteps pounding the earth as they struggled to keep up. Don't lose him, I yelled, pushing myself harder, fueled by a fiery determination. Suddenly, I caught a glimpse of him, his unmistakable silhouette slipping further into the woods. Stop. Police. I shouted, but he only quickened his pace. My heart raced, a mix of fear and anger fueling my every step. I couldn't let him get away, not again. Sarah, wait. Mark's voice echoed behind me, but I couldn't stop. I had to catch him. It felt like a game of cat and mouse, and I was done being the prey. As I rounded a particularly thick cluster of trees, I stumbled for a moment, regaining my balance just in time to see Kibbe disappear into a clearing. Got you, I hissed, pushing forward with renewed vigor. But just as I thought I was gaining ground, he vanished completely, swallowed by the shadows of the forest. Frustration bubbled inside me. Damn it, I exclaimed, my voice breaking the eerie silence that surrounded me. I stood there, panting, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The rustle of leaves above me made my heart skip. Then, just as I was about to lose hope, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I fished it out, glancing at the screen. Unknown number, I muttered, debating whether to answer. But desperation drove me. Sarah Lawson, I said, breathless from the chase. Detective, a gravelly voice replied, sending chills down my spine. I know where he is. Who is this? I demanded, my heart racing anew, but the voice continued, undeterred. You need to listen carefully. Kibbe is planning his next move. If you want to catch him, you have to get to the old warehouse by the river. Now. Panic surged through me. Wait, how do you know this? But the line went dead, leaving me grasping at air. I looked back toward where my team was, uncertainty creeping in. Mark? I shouted, thumbing my phone to call him back. We need to go, now. Did you find him? Mark asked, his face filled with worry as he jogged up to me. No, but we've got a lead, I said, urgency spilling from my lips. We have to move fast. Kibby's planning something. Without waiting for a response, I turned and sprinted back toward the vehicles, my heart pounding not just from the chase, but from the looming dread of what we might face next. We were close, so close, but with Kibby nothing was ever straightforward. As the trees blurred past me, I felt the weight of the investigation pressing down, a mixture of hope and despair swirling within me. It was a race against time, and I was determined to finish it once and for all. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness as I approached the abandoned cabin, the weight of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Each step felt heavy, almost as if I were trudging through the memories of all the lives lost because of Roger Kibby. The battered door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of damp wood and something far more sinister. Sarah, I whispered to myself, trying to muster the resolve that had fueled me through this harrowing investigation. This was it, the end of the line. I could feel the darkness creeping in, wrapping around me like a shroud, reminding me of the countless nights spent chasing shadows and nightmares. My hand rested on the cold grip of my service weapon, the only thing standing between me and the man who had terrorized so many. As I stepped further inside, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Kibby, I called out, my voice steady despite the tremor in my gut. I know you're in here. Silence answered me, but I could sense his presence, like a predator waiting to pounce. Detective Lawson, how nice of you to drop by, a smooth voice echoed from the shadows, sending a chill down my spine. Roger Kibby emerged, leaning casually against a wall, his eyes glinting with a malevolence that sent my heart racing. You've been quite the nuisance, haven't you? What have you done? I demanded, my anger surging. You think you can just escape the consequences of your actions? He chuckled softly, a sound devoid of any warmth. Consequences? Oh, Sarah, you misunderstand. This was never about escape. This was a game, your game. He stepped closer and I felt the air grow colder. You see, I've been watching you for a long time. Your family, your sister, they were just pieces on my board. A wave of nausea washed over me as his words sank in. What do you mean? What do you know about my sister? I felt the walls of the cabin close in, memories of her laughter mingling with the horror of the truth I was beginning to unravel. Such a pity, really, Kibby continued, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. She could have been a great player. But I needed her to understand the stakes. He moved closer, his smirk widening. And you, my dear detective, were the perfect opponent. I struggled to keep my composure, my mind racing. You've terrorized this community, taken innocent lives, and for what? Your sick amusement. Precisely, Kibby grinned, reveling in my outrage. You were never going to catch me, Sarah. I orchestrated everything. Every hitchhiker, every woman you tried to save, those were my moves, and you were always a step behind. The realization hit me like a blow. Kibby had been manipulating not just his victims but me as well. I felt the weight of my failures crashing down on me. This ends now, I growled, my fingers tightening around my weapon. Does it? He taunted, tilting his head. You think you can just pull the trigger and walk away? You'll still carry the burden of knowing you couldn't save them. You'll always be haunted by the ghosts of your past. I took a deep breath, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. I won't let you control me anymore. You're under arrest, Kibby. This game is over. In a flash, he lunged toward me and instinct took over. I fired, the shot ringing out in the confined space, echoing like a final verdict. He staggered back, a look of shock crossing his face before he crumpled to the floor. As I stood over him, breathless and trembling, the reality of what I had done settled in. Kibby lay there, smirking even in defeat, a twisted satisfaction lingering in his eyes. You think you've won, but you'll never escape the chaos I've sown in your life, he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt hollow, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the raw ache of loss and helplessness. I had apprehended him, but at what cost? The faces of the victims flashed in my mind, their stories forever intertwined with my own. Justice was served, but the scars remained, and as I stepped back, the cabin felt less like a triumph and more like a tomb, a mausoleum for the lives Kibby had claimed and the peace I would never find. Story 3. The fluorescent lights flickered above me in the precinct, casting an eerie glow on the wall of photographs that loomed like ghosts in the dimly lit room. Each face, smiling, hopeful, told a story that had been cut short, a life snuffed out too soon. I leaned against the desk, my jaw clenched as I studied the images of the missing women. They were more than just cases. They were reminders of my relentless pursuit of justice, reminders of the haunting reality that I had yet to solve the Ocean Parkway murders. As I traced my finger over the photo of a young woman, her vibrant eyes staring back at me, the phone rang, breaking the heavy silence. My heart raced as I answered, "Detective Monroe." The voice on the other end was urgent, filled with a sense of dread. "Detective, we've got another body. It's on the parkway." Chills ran down my spine. It felt as if the air had thickened around me. "I'll be there in 5, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I grabbed my jacket, the weight of my badge heavy against my chest, and dashed out of the precinct, the echo of my footsteps reverberating in the empty hall. The drive to Ocean Parkway was a blur, the world outside my window a streak of colors and shadows. The scene was cordoned off with police tape, flashing lights illuminating the area like a macabre circus. I stepped out of my car, the familiar smell of salt water mingling with the metallic scent of blood filling the air. "Detective Monroe," Officer Carter called, waving me over. He looked ashen, his eyes darting nervously toward the scene. "It's bad, really bad." I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my ears. There she lay, the victim, pale against the dark sand, a haunting reminder of the lives I was trying to protect. I knelt beside her, my breath hitching in my throat. She was young, maybe in her 20s, dressed in a summer sundress that fluttered gently with the ocean breeze. "Do we have an ID?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of what I was witnessing. "Not yet," Carter replied, his face grim. "But there's something strange." He pointed to the victim's hand, where a small engraved charm glinted in the moonlight. I reached for it, carefully lifting it from her lifeless fingers. "Look at this," I murmured, turning it over in my palm. The charm was a delicate heart, with initials carved into it, JS. My mind raced, recalling the previous cases. Had I seen this before? As I stood up, I felt a presence behind me. It was Captain Harris, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a rare seriousness. "Monroe, get the forensics team over here. We need to process this scene ASAP." I nodded, my mind still racing. "Captain, I think this charm could be a link to previous victims. We need to dig into it." "Do what you have to do, but keep it under wraps for now. We don't want to stir panic," he replied, his voice firm. As I examined the area, the ocean waves crashed rhythmically against the shore, almost mocking the chaos surrounding me. The sound was both soothing and unsettling, a reminder of the danger lurking in the shadows. I pulled out my notebook, jotting down my observations when I overheard 2 officers whispering nearby. "Another one," one said, shaking his head. "What's it going to take for this to stop?" "Who knows," the other replied, glancing at the body. "But it feels like we're chasing ghosts." I felt a surge of anger at their words. These weren't just ghosts, they were lives taken too soon. I had to find a way to break this cycle. "Monroe," Harris called, pulling me from my thoughts. "We need to head back to the station and start compiling a list of the missing women. This charm could be our only lead." I nodded, already thinking ahead. "And we need to look into any connections between them. There has to be a reason they were targeted." As we made our way back to the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case would lead me down a dark path. A path filled with secrets, lies, and a truth that I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But one thing was clear. I wouldn't rest until I uncovered the identity of the killer haunting Ocean Parkway. The weight of that responsibility felt immense, but I was determined to bring justice to those who could no longer fight for themselves. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stepped into the small, cluttered room filled with the lingering scent of stale coffee and desperation. The walls were adorned with posters of missing persons, each face a painful reminder of the lives cut short. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Today I was going to talk to the friends of the latest victim, hoping to peel back the layers of their grief and uncover any clues that might lead us closer to the truth. "Detective Monroe," I introduced myself, my voice steady despite the weight of the situation. The 4 women seated in front of me looked worn, their eyes red and puffy from crying. A tall blonde, Sarah, was the first to speak. "Thank you for meeting with us," she said, her voice trembling slightly. We want to know what happened to her." "I understand," I replied, taking a seat across from them. "I need to ask you some questions about Emily. Can you tell me about the last time you saw her?" The room fell silent for a moment before another friend, Mia, piped up. She was excited about her date, but she didn't tell us much about him. Just that he was charming and mysterious. "Do you remember his name?" I asked, leaning forward, the hairs on my arms prickling with anticipation. "No, she never said. Just that he was always at that bar on Ocean Parkway," Sarah added, biting her lip. "She thought he was different, you know? Not like the other guys." "What was the name of the bar?" I probed, pulling out my notebook. "Duke's," Mia replied, glancing at her friends as if seeking reassurance. She loved that place. Said it had a good vibe, but I don't know, it always felt a bit off to me. I scribbled down the name, my mind racing. It was a starting point, a thread to pull on. Did you see her with him? Did you catch a glimpse of what he looked like? Just once, Sarah murmured, her gaze drifting to the floor. He had dark hair, kind of scruffy. Looked like he spent a lot of time outside. I nodded, my heart racing. Did she ever mention anything else about him? Anything that stood out? A heavy silence enveloped the room, and I could see the gears turning in their minds. Finally, Mia spoke up again, her voice barely above a whisper. She mentioned he had a charm bracelet. Said it was unique and she loved it. Did she say anything about where he got it? I pressed, my instincts telling me that this could be important. No, Sarah replied, shaking her head. But I remember her showing it to us. It had these little engraved charms. One of them looked like a star. I jotted down the details, my pulse quickening. Thank you for sharing this with me. If you think of anything else, please don't hesitate to reach out. I stood, offering them a reassuring smile, but deep inside, I was already calculating my next move. Back at the precinct, I sat at my desk, surrounded by files and photographs of the victims. I pulled out the surveillance footage from Duke's, replaying it frame by frame. It was a dimly lit bar, but I squinted at the faces, searching for something, anything, that might connect this new victim to the others. Then I saw him. Frank. He lingered at the edge of the frame like a shadow, just out of reach whenever a woman went missing. My stomach twisted. Why was he always there? I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. Why do you keep showing up, Frank? I muttered to myself, feeling a chill creep down my spine. Who are you talking to? My partner, Harris, leaned against the doorframe, a teasing smile on his face. Just thinking out loud, I replied, trying to shake off the unease. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, stepping into the room. More like a predator, I muttered, gesturing to the screen. This guy keeps popping up in the surveillance footage from Duke's. I think he might be connected to the victims. Harris frowned as he studied the screen. It's just a coincidence, Lisa. You can't jump to conclusions without solid evidence. Maybe, I said, my voice tight. But I'm not letting this go. There's something here. As I continued to analyze the footage, I couldn't shake the feeling that Frank was more than just a bystander. He was a thread in a much darker tapestry, and I needed to pull on it until the whole thing unraveled. The hunt was on, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led me. As I settled into the driver's seat of my unmarked car, the dim light of the bar flickered through the windshield, casting shadows that danced along the pavement. Frank was my only lead, and I was determined to catch him in the act. A chill ran down my spine as I recalled the faces of the women whose lives had been cut short, their stories intertwined by fear and darkness. My fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as I watched the entrance, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Lisa, you sure about this? My partner, Detective Mike Sullivan, asked as he leaned back in the passenger seat, his voice laced with skepticism. He had been my anchor through the storm of this investigation, but even he could sense the weight of my obsession. I have to be, I replied, my eyes fixed on the bar door. He's been there every time a woman goes missing. I can't ignore it any longer. As if on cue, Frank emerged from the bar, his hulking figure silhouetted against the neon lights. My heart raced as I spotted a young woman at his side, her laughter ringing out like a siren's call in the night. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was not just a stakeout. This was a moment that could change everything. Should we follow them? Mike asked, his voice low, filled with urgency. I nodded, the decision made. I flicked the lights off and pulled out into the street, keeping a safe distance. My mind raced through the scenarios. What if he was leading her into danger? What if I didn't intervene in time? As we trailed them along the winding roads, I could see Frank leaning in close to the woman, his hand brushing against her back. A deep sense of dread settled in my chest. I couldn't let another woman fall victim to his charm, not if I could prevent it. Wait, I said suddenly as they turned onto a dimly lit side street. I need to get closer. I parked the car and slipped out, trying to remain inconspicuous as I followed them on foot. The night air was thick with tension, and every sound seemed amplified. The rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. As I crept closer, I could hear their conversation. Come on, let's just go have some fun, Frank urged, his voice smooth yet predatory. The young woman hesitated. I don't know. My friends are waiting for me. Don't worry about them. You and I can have a great time. Just a little adventure, right? His tone was disarming, but I could sense the underlying menace. I edged forward, ready to intervene, but then something shifted. The woman glanced over her shoulder, her expression turning wary as she seemed to sense the danger creeping in. My instincts screamed for me to act, but I hesitated, my gut twisting. "Mike," I whispered into my radio, "I need backup. Now." "Roger that. Where are you?" he responded, his voice steady despite the urgency. "Side street, heading toward the old warehouse. I think they're going inside." My eyes remained locked on Frank and the woman, who had now taken a step back, her uncertainty evident. "Don't be stupid, Lisa. Wait for me," Mike cautioned, but I was already moving closer, the need to protect overtaking my better judgment. Just as I reached the edge of the alley, I watched in horror as Frank grabbed the woman's wrist, his grip possessive and threatening. My heart raced as I made the decision to intervene. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping into the light, drawing their attention. Frank's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing as he released the woman, who stumbled back, confusion and fear flooding her features. "What the hell do you want?" he spat, masking surprise with aggression. "I want you to let her go," I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear that threatened to creep in. The woman stood frozen, a deer caught in headlights. "Or what? You think you can just come here and play the hero? You don't know who you're dealing with," he growled, taking a step closer, his body language radiating hostility. "I know exactly who you are. And I know what you've done," I replied, my mind racing as I weighed my options. Before I could react further, Frank turned to the woman. "Run. Get out of here," he shouted as if my presence had suddenly ignited a fire in him. She hesitated for a moment, eyes darting between us, and then bolted down the alley, disappearing into the night. "No!" I yelled, feeling a surge of panic. I lunged forward, but Frank was faster. He pushed me aside, sending me sprawling to the ground. My heart sank as I realized I had lost her, and in that moment, I was left alone with him. "Now what's it going to be, detective?" he sneered, closing the distance between us, his breath hot with contempt. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared for a confrontation I had not anticipated. In his eyes, I saw a glimmer of something dark and dangerous, and I knew I was standing at the precipice of a nightmare. The rain pounded relentlessly against my car as I drove through the darkened streets of Long Island, my mind racing with the implications of my last encounter with Frank. I replayed his words over and over, "I know the real killer." The chill in his voice sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing a game, and I was the unwitting pawn. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up, smearing the glow of streetlights into blurry halos that matched the confusion swirling in my head. I pulled into a parking lot near the beach, the ocean's roar a distant reminder of the secrets it held. I needed clarity, and I had a hunch that clarity might come from an unexpected place. A local psychic named Marlene. I hesitated outside her small, weathered shop. The flickering neon sign read "Psychic Readings," but the paint was peeling, much like my confidence in the supernatural. Still, I pushed the door open, a bell tinkling softly overhead. The shop was dimly lit, filled with the scent of incense and the sound of wind chimes tinkling softly, creating an atmosphere that felt both welcoming and eerily unsettling. "Marlene," I called out, my voice echoing in the quiet space. "Ah, Detective Monroe." Her voice floated from the back room, smooth as silk yet laced with an unplaceable tension. "I've been expecting you." I stepped further in, and there she was, draped in colorful shawls, surrounded by crystals and tarot cards. Her eyes were a piercing gray, seemingly able to see through the layers I'd built around myself. "You seek answers," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, I need to know what's happening. I'm chasing a killer, but I'm not sure if I'm getting closer or if I'm just running in circles." "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a small table draped in a velvet cloth. I complied, feeling a strange mix of skepticism and hope. Marlene shuffled her tarot deck, her fingers nimble and practiced. "Let's see what the cards reveal." As she laid them out, I felt my heart race. The first card was the Tower, depicting ruin and chaos. The second was the Moon, a symbol of deception and hidden truths. "Things are not as they seem," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "There are shadows lurking, and not all of them are on the outside. Be wary of those who offer you safety, for they may lead you to peril." "Are you saying someone I trust could be involved?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "Trust is a fragile thing, detective. The killer is closer than you think. Watch the water. The sea holds secrets." I swallowed hard, the implications of her words gnawing at my insides. "What do you mean by that?" "Follow the tide and it will lead you to the truth. But be cautious, the waves can be treacherous." I nodded, trying to absorb her cryptic warnings. I couldn't afford to ignore anything, not with the stakes so high. Thank you, Marlene. I appreciate your insight. As I left her shop, the rain had subsided to a gentle drizzle. The air felt charged, as if the world around me was holding its breath. I climbed back into my car, my mind racing with possibilities. I had to find a way to connect Frank's claims with the shadows Marlene hinted at. I decided to head back to the precinct. Maybe there were connections I hadn't considered. Maybe there was something in Frank's past that could reveal more than just his alibi. When I arrived, the lights in the station flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I walked straight to my desk, pulling up Frank's file, determined to dissect every detail. Hours passed as I pored over reports and photographs, my coffee growing cold beside me. "Hey Lisa," my partner, Detective Harris, said, stepping into the room. "You've been at it for hours. You need a break." "I'm fine, Harris. Just trying to connect some dots." I avoided his gaze, knowing he'd been pushing for a different angle on the case. "Don't get too fixated on one suspect. Sometimes the answer is right under your nose," he replied, a hint of something in his voice that I couldn't quite place. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm not backing down," I shot back, my resolve strengthening. As he left, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew more than he was letting on. I returned to the file, my gut churning as I considered the implications of Marlene's words. The killer was closer than I thought, and the ocean whispered secrets that I was determined to uncover. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine as I received a notification on my phone. Another body had been found near the Ocean Parkway. My heart sank. The cycle of horror was far from over, and I was racing against time to unravel the truth before it swallowed me whole. The air was thick with salt and decay as I stepped inside the abandoned beach house, a place that felt like a ghost of its former self. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, each sound echoing in the silence that enveloped me. I had received an anonymous tip-off that this house was linked to the killer, and my instincts screamed that I was onto something significant. The musty smell of mildew hit me, but I pressed on, my heart racing with both fear and anticipation. As I moved through the dimly lit rooms, I spotted something that made my stomach churn. Photographs taped haphazardly to the walls. Each image was a haunting reminder of the lives stolen. Faces of the women, their smiles frozen in time, a stark contrast to the fate that had befallen them. I felt a chill run down my spine as I recognized some of the victims. They had been my case files, stories I had tried to unravel. Now they were nothing more than trophies for a monster. "God, what have you done?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice barely above a breath. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I stepped closer to the wall. I reached out to touch the edges of the photographs, trying to ground myself in the reality of the situation. This was no random act of violence, it was a calculated game, and I was the player who had unknowingly walked into the trap. Suddenly, a noise shattered the eerie stillness, a door creaking open. My heart raced as I turned sharply, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. I knew I should run, but I was rooted to the spot, a deer caught in headlights. No answer came, but I could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. I dropped into a crouch, desperately searching for a place to hide. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Was it Frank? Had he followed me here? I felt the weight of the photographs pressing down on me, reminding me of what was at stake. Then, before I could react, a figure emerged from the shadows. A man, his face obscured by darkness. Panic surged through me and I scrambled backward, my fingers brushing against the wall for support. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice stronger now, fueled by adrenaline. But the figure only advanced, a menacing silhouette against the faint light filtering through the grimy windows. "Detective Monroe," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with malice. "You really shouldn't have come here." My breath hitched as I recognized the tone. It was one I had heard before, a voice that was all too familiar. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What do you want?" "You're too close, Lisa. You need to turn back before it's too late." He stepped into the light and my heart sank. It was a face I had never expected to see here, someone who had been in the background all along, silently watching. I calculated my options, but before I could make a decision, he lunged at me and instinct kicked in. I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding his grasp. I scrambled to my feet, the adrenaline pumping through my veins like fire. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears as I bolted for the door, but he was faster, blocking my escape route. "Stop running, Lisa. You can't escape the truth," he shouted, his frustration boiling over. I darted toward a window, the glass dirty and cracked. With a surge of determination, I threw myself against it, praying it would hold. The sound of shattering glass echoed in the room as I tumbled through the opening, landing hard on the sand outside. Pain shot through my body, but I forced myself to move, to crawl away from the house that had become a tomb of secrets. "Lisa!" he yelled from inside, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. My body screamed in protest as I stumbled to my feet and ran, the salty air filling my lungs as I raced toward the shoreline, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that house as possible. I felt the fear clawing at my insides, but it was accompanied by something else, a fierce determination to uncover the truth no matter the cost. As I reached the ocean's edge, waves crashed against the shore, their relentless rhythm mirroring my own racing heart. Glancing back at the beach house, I knew I had narrowly escaped something horrific. But that escape came with a price. The weight of the photographs, the faces of the victims, haunted me. I was in deeper than I had ever imagined, and I had to find a way to bring the killer to justice before more lives were lost. The air in the precinct felt thick with tension as I paced back and forth in my office, my mind racing with the implications of what I had uncovered. Detective Harris, my partner, had been there with me through the darkest moments of this investigation. We had shared long nights fueled by coffee and the urgency of unsolved crimes. But now the very thought of him sent chills down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow involved in the darkness that enveloped the women along Ocean Parkway. "Lisa, you okay?" Harris's voice broke through my thoughts as he leaned against the doorframe, his casual demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I forced a smile, trying to act natural. "Just thinking about the case," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, it's been a rough one," he said, stepping into the room. I could see the weariness etched on his face, but there was something else, something lurking behind his eyes that I couldn't quite place. "Have you had any leads?" I asked, trying to gauge his reaction. "Nothing solid," he said, his gaze drifting to the wall where photos of the victims hung like ghosts. "I just wish we could close this book already." "Me too," I muttered, my heart racing. I wanted to trust him, but doubt gnawed at my insides like a persistent hunger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting eerie shadows across the precinct, I decided it was time to confront him. "Harris, can we talk somewhere private?" I asked, gesturing towards the back of the station. "Sure, what's up?" he replied, following me into the dimly lit break room. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. "I've been looking into some things, about the victims, about you," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. "About me?" he echoed, a hint of amusement in his tone. "What are you implying, Lisa?" "I'm not sure yet, but there are inconsistencies in the timeline. You've been too close to the investigation, too involved," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Come on, Lisa. You know I've always had your back," he said, his smile faltering just a bit. "You're letting this get to you. We're on the same side here." "Are we?" I shot back, my eyes narrowing. "You said you knew the real killer. What did you mean by that?" His expression shifted, the playfulness evaporating as a shadow crossed his face. "I meant that we're all just trying to find the truth. Sometimes that means making tough choices." "Tough choices? You mean eliminating undesirables?" I pressed, my heart pounding in my chest. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "These women weren't innocent, Lisa. They were part of a bigger problem." I recoiled at his words, a sick feeling settling in my stomach. "You can't seriously believe that. They were victims." "Victims of their own choices," he replied, his eyes glinting with a twisted sense of justification. "I'm doing what needs to be done for this town." My heart raced as the realization hit me like a slap. You're the killer?" I stammered, my voice trembling. "Detective Monroe, I think you should sit down," he said, his voice eerily calm. I backed away, fear clawing at my throat. "Stay away from me." At that moment, the tension snapped like a taut wire. He lunged toward me, but I was quicker, sprinting past him and bursting through the break room door. My mind raced as I darted down the hallway, my heart pounding like a war drum. "Lisa." "Wait," he called after me, but I ignored him, my only thought to escape. I burst into the main area of the precinct, but the chaos that erupted was overwhelming. Officers were on edge, the air thick with confusion. I darted toward the exit, but Harris was right behind me. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he shouted, his voice echoing through the station. I stumbled outside, the cold air hitting me like a splash of ice water. My breath came in quick gasps as I turned to face him. "You need to turn yourself in, Harris." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" he taunted, a manic grin spreading across his face. "You wouldn't dare." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me trembling in the dim light of the parking lot. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed for backup. "We have a situation. He's the killer." As I waited for help, the weight of my discovery crashed down on me. I had trusted him, believed in our partnership, but now I was left grappling with the horrifying truth. Just then, a notification pinged on my phone, pulling me from my dark thoughts. I opened the alert, my blood running cold as I read the message. Another body had been found on Ocean Parkway. The cycle of horror was far from over, and I was left standing at the edge of a nightmare I couldn't escape. Story 4. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows along the cracked pavement of Interstate 45. I stood there, my thumb out, feeling the weight of uncertainty heavy on my heart. The humid Texas air wrapped around me like a damp blanket, and I squinted into the distance, hoping to catch sight of a vehicle that would whisk me away to Galveston. I had dreams of salty breezes and sandy toes, but all I could see were the endless stretches of asphalt and the occasional glint of a car heading in the opposite direction. "Come on, just one ride," I whispered to myself, the words barely breaking the thick silence around me. I was just a girl with a battered backpack and a head full of dreams, but out here, on the edge of the world, I felt small and vulnerable. After what felt like an eternity, a dusty pickup truck slowed down, its engine rumbling like a hungry beast. My heart raced as the window slid down, revealing a man with a friendly smile and a weathered face. "Need a lift, darlin'?" he called out, his voice thick with a Texas drawl. "Yes, please," I replied, hopping into the passenger seat without a second thought. The truck smelled of leather and something else I couldn't quite place, something faintly unsettling. I brushed it aside, choosing instead to focus on the adventure ahead. As we pulled away from the highway, the landscape shifted. The bustling world I had known faded behind us, replaced by winding backroads lined with dense trees and murky marshlands. I glanced sideways at my driver, trying to read his intentions. "What's your name?" I asked, attempting to fill the silence that hung heavily between us. "Name's Hank," he replied, his eyes on the road, but I caught a flicker of something. Was it irritation? "You're not from around here, are ya?" "No, just passing through," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm headed to Galveston for a little vacation." "Galveston, huh? Nice place. You'll love it." He chuckled, but there was an edge to his laughter that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to look out the window, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. The trees grew thicker, their branches clawing at the sky, and the air felt heavier, laden with secrets. "Been out here long?" I ventured, hoping to steer the conversation to safer waters. "Long enough to know that it's a dangerous world out there," Hank replied, his voice suddenly serious. "You gotta be careful who you trust." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I always try to be cautious." Hank glanced at me, his smile returning, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Smart girl." He shifted gears and we veered deeper into the backroads, the truck jostling over bumps and dips. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, an instinctual warning bell urging me to pay attention. As the shadows lengthened and the sun dipped below the horizon, I couldn't shake the unsettling chill that washed over me. It was as if the very land we drove through was alive, watching, waiting. I turned to Hank again, forcing a light-hearted tone. "So, what do you do for fun around here?" "Fun." He laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed in the confined space. "There's not much fun to be had out here. Just work and, well, the occasional adventure." He winked and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Right," I said, my voice faltering. I wanted to ask more, to pry deeper into his life and learn about the shadows lurking behind his smile, but I held back. Instead, I turned my gaze back to the road ahead, the darkness creeping in around us. Every mile we drove felt like a step into the unknown, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led into a trap. Suddenly, the truck jolted as Hank hit a pothole and I clutched the armrest, my heart racing. "Everything okay?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. "Yeah, just these damn roads," he muttered, his grip tightening on the wheel. "They're not what they used to be." As we continued down the winding path, I could feel the air grow thick with tension. I sensed that the further we went, the more I was slipping away from safety and into a place where darkness thrived. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Do you think we'll hit the highway soon?" "Soon enough," he replied, but his eyes darted to the rearview mirror as if searching for something, or someone. My stomach churned with unease. The trees closed in around us and a single thought echoed in my mind: I had to get out of this truck. The flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed like a swarm of annoying insects, casting a pallid glow over the cluttered chaos of my office. Manila folders stacked precariously on my desk screamed for attention, but the weight of each unsolved case pressed down on me like the humidity outside. I ran a hand through my unkempt hair, the stress of the unsolved murders I had been reviewing gnawing at my insides. The Texas killing fields were not just a patch of land, they were a graveyard of dreams, a haunting reminder of the lives lost to the darkness that lurked there. As I flipped through the files, the familiar names and faces blurred together, each one a reminder of a life cut short, a family left in despair. It was relentless, the feeling of being overwhelmed by the past, but I couldn't shake the urge to dig deeper. I had to find something, anything, that could lead me to the truth. The ringing of the phone broke through my thoughts, and I snatched the receiver up, my heart racing with a flicker of hope. "Detective Thompson," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mike, it's Lisa from Dispatch," she said, her tone clipped. "We've got a new missing person report. A hitchhiker last seen near the killing fields." My pulse quickened. "Details?" "Name's Sarah Matthews. 22 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. She was trying to get to Galveston. We've got a witness who saw her get into a truck. That's all we have for now." "Did they get a description of the driver?" I asked, already scribbling down notes. "Nothing concrete. Just that he was driving a dark-colored pickup." "The usual," she replied, her voice tinged with frustration. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar dread creeping in. "I'll head out there. Let me know if you get anything else." After hanging up, I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. The air outside was thick with the scent of rain, a storm brewing on the horizon. I climbed into my car, the engine rumbling to life as I drove towards the killing fields. With every mile, I felt the weight of every unsolved case pressing against my chest, the urgency of this new report pulling me forward. Arriving at the scene, I was greeted by the familiar sight of twisted trees and marshy land. The sun dipped low, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. I stepped out of my car and approached the area where Sarah had last been seen. My senses heightened as I scanned the surroundings, searching for anything that could lead me to her. "Thompson." A voice called out, breaking through my concentration. It was Officer Martinez, a young cop with a keen instinct for trouble. "You got a minute?" "Yeah, what's up?" I replied, turning to face him. "There's a local woman who wants to talk to you. She claims she had a close call on that same route." "Bring her over," I said, feeling a flicker of hope. Moments later, a woman in her 30s approached, her eyes wide with fear. "Detective," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to tell you what happened to me." "Take a breath. Just start from the beginning," I encouraged, motioning for her to sit on a nearby log. "I was hitchhiking last week, same area," she began, her hands shaking. "A truck stopped for me. The driver seemed nice at first, but then he turned down a dirt road and—" "Did you get a look at him?" I pressed, leaning forward. "Yes. He had a tattoo on his arm, something like a snake or a dragon. And he kept looking at me like I was—" "I don't know, pray," she stammered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I managed to jump out when he wasn't paying attention. I ran until I found a house and begged for help." "Did you report this?" I asked, my heart racing as I connected the dots. "No. I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't want to cause trouble," she said, her voice breaking. "You did the right thing coming here," I assured her. "This could help us find Sarah." "Did you see where he went?" She shook her head, her expression filled with dread. "I was too scared. I just ran." As she spoke, I felt the chilling realization settling in. Another victim was out there and time was running out. The killing fields were alive with secrets, and I was determined to uncover them before it was too late. I awoke in a disorienting haze, the air heavy and suffocating. My heart raced as I blinked against the darkness, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The stench of damp earth and something metallic filled my nostrils. Panic clawed at my chest, tightening its grip as I realized I was bound, my wrists raw from frantically testing the restraints. I lay on a cold, hard surface, the chill seeping into my bones. "Hello?" I croaked, my voice barely rising above a whisper. The sound echoed back at me, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I strained to hear anything, but all I could discern was the distant murmur of water, perhaps a creek or the marshlands surrounding me. The stories I'd heard about this place, the Texas killing fields, flooded my mind. The haunting tales of girls vanishing without a trace became a chilling soundtrack to my rising dread. "Stay calm, Sarah. You have to think," I muttered to myself, trying to stave off the panic that threatened to engulf me. Memories of hitchhiking flashed before my eyes. The friendly driver, his smile disarming, the way I had let my guard down. I had been so naive. Suddenly I heard footsteps, heavy and deliberate. My breath hitched as the door creaked open, and a sliver of light sliced through the darkness. A figure stood silhouetted against the brightness, casting an elongated shadow that seemed to stretch towards me. "You're awake," he said, his voice smooth yet laced with an unsettling calmness. I could barely see his face, but the glint of something sharp caught my eye. A knife, perhaps. "Who are you?" I demanded, forcing my voice to sound firmer than I felt. He stepped closer, the light illuminating his features just enough for me to see the cruel twist of his lips. "You're in no position to ask questions, sweetheart." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding like a war drum. "Let me go," I said, striving for defiance even as fear coiled tightly within me. He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You think it's that easy? Not a chance. You'll be much more useful to me here." As he leaned closer, I caught a whiff of something rancid and bile rose in my throat. I had to escape. There had to be a way out. My eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for anything I could use. A rusty pipe, perhaps, or loose debris. "You're scared?" he said almost mockingly. "You should be. There are others like you, but they didn't make it. You might not either." His words slashed through my resolve, but I couldn't let him see my fear. "You won't get away with this," I spat back, drawing on every ounce of courage I had left. "I already have," he replied smoothly, his smile unnerving. "But don't worry, your screams will be music to my ears." I felt a surge of rage at his arrogance. I couldn't let him win. As he turned to leave, I took a deep breath, focusing on the sound of the door creaking shut. I could hear the distant chirping of crickets outside, free, unshackled. I had to find a way to join them. My mind raced, recalling my survival skills from camping trips with my father. I remembered how he had taught me to think critically in dire situations, to look for weaknesses. The restraints on my wrists were tight, but perhaps if I could twist just right, I could loosen them enough to slip free. I started to wriggle my arms, fighting against the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. "Come on, Sarah, focus," I whispered to myself, feeling the fibers of the rope digging into my skin. I pushed against the pain, gritting my teeth as I twisted my wrists, desperate for freedom. Suddenly, I heard the door open again and I froze. The figure stepped back in, a smirk plastered on his face. "What are you doing? Trying to escape already?" I forced my body to remain still, heart racing as I waited for the right moment. I couldn't let him see my progress. "You're wasting your time," he continued, stepping closer, arrogance oozing from him. "The more you struggle, the worse it will be for you." But I wouldn't let his words break me. I would find a way out. I had to. I felt the cold bite of the night air as I stumbled through the dense woods, my heart racing from both fear and adrenaline. The ropes that had bound my wrists lay discarded behind me, fraying and tattered. I could hardly remember how I had managed to free myself. The only thing clear in my mind was the desperate need to put as much distance between myself and that wretched place as possible. Branches snagged at my clothes, and the ground beneath my feet was uneven, littered with roots and fallen leaves that crunched softly as I moved. The sounds of the night surrounded me, crickets chirping, the rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. My instincts screamed at me to keep moving, to escape the unseen horror that lurked behind me. Suddenly, I caught a flicker of light through the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I crept closer, cautiously. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, but another part, the part that fought for survival, urged me to listen. I peered out from behind a thick trunk, my heart pounding as I caught sight of two men standing around a small campfire. "Did you hear about the hitchhiker?" one of them said, his voice low and gravelly. "She's been missing for days now." "Yeah," the other replied, a hint of malice in his tone. "She was just one of many. The fields are hungry, you know. Always looking for fresh meat." My stomach twisted at the words. I pressed my back against the tree, willing myself to stay quiet, to remain hidden. Who were these men? What were they talking about? I strained to catch more of the conversation, knowing that any detail could be crucial in understanding the nightmare I had stumbled into. "She won't be the last," the first man continued, flicking dirt into the fire. "We've got our methods and they work. No one ever suspects a thing. The police are too busy chasing shadows." "Yeah," the second man snorted. "Those idiots don't know a damn thing. They think it's random, but it's all connected. You know how it is. Once you're in the game, there's no way out." Cold fear washed over me. I had to find a way to outsmart them, to escape this web of darkness. My mind raced and I felt the urge to bolt, but I couldn't leave without knowing more. I couldn't become another statistic, another face on a missing persons poster. I swallowed hard, trying to stifle the panic rising within me. Just as I was about to inch back into the shadows, something rustled behind me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I turned slowly, my breath hitching as I scanned the darkness. "Who's there?" one of the men called, his voice carrying a sharp edge. I could hear the crackle of the fire, smell the smoke wafting through the air. I was trapped. I needed a distraction. I reached down and picked up a small rock, my hands trembling. It felt heavy in my palm, but I had to make a choice. With all the strength I could muster, I hurled it away from me, deeper into the woods. It landed with a loud thud, followed by the sound of rustling leaves. "Go check it out," the first man barked, and my pulse quickened. I didn't wait for them to decide. I dashed in the opposite direction, my legs pumping beneath me. I could hear their footsteps crashing through the brush behind me, but the adrenaline surged through me like fire. I navigated the trees, ducking and weaving, each breath a struggle as panic threatened to overwhelm me. I needed to find a way to escape this nightmare. I had to believe that there was a way out, that I wouldn't become just another forgotten name in a file. As I ran, fragments of memories flickered in my mind. My family, my friends, the life I had left behind. I couldn't let them down, I had to survive. I couldn't let those men win. Each step carried me farther from that fire, farther from the darkness that threatened to consume me. In the distance, I could see the faint glow of headlights cutting through the trees. Hope ignited within me. Maybe there was still a chance to reach safety, to find help. I pushed myself harder, my feet pounding against the ground, desperation driving me forward. But as I neared the road, a chilling thought crept into my mind. Would I be too late? Would I find someone who believed my story, who would help me put an end to the horrors that had unfolded? The answer lay just ahead, and I had to grasp it before the darkness swallowed me whole. The dense woods seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching like fingers ready to snatch me back into darkness. My heart raced as I stumbled through the underbrush, branches clawing at my clothes. I paused, trying to catch my breath, my ears straining to hear any sound that might indicate I was not alone. And then I heard it, the low murmur of voices. Peering through the thick foliage, I spotted two men standing in a small clearing, their backs to me. They were talking quietly, but I could make out snippets of their conversation. "We need to keep this quiet," one said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "If anyone finds out what we're doing, we're done for." My instincts kicked in and I crouched lower, trying to blend into the shadows. It struck me that these men were part of the network I had feared, the dark underbelly of the killing fields that had claimed so many lives. I strained to hear more. "Those girls don't know what they're getting into," the other man replied, a hint of derision in his tone. "Just a couple of hitchhikers thinking they can trust anyone who stops for them." A chill ran down my spine. They were talking about me, about girls like me. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't just run blindly. My mind raced, piecing together what I knew about them. If I was going to survive, I needed to outsmart them. I took a deep breath, carefully backing away from the clearing and retracing my steps. I couldn't go back the way I came. I had to find another way out of this nightmare. Suddenly, I remembered the paths I had seen earlier, the ones that looked like they led deeper into the woods. If I could get to the edge of the trees, maybe I could find a road or a house. As I navigated through the thick underbrush, I could hear the men growing more animated. "We can't keep waiting around," one of them said. "We need to make our move soon. The longer we wait, the more chances we have of getting caught." Caught? Did they mean they were planning to take another girl? Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to think like them. I needed to know where they were going. Just then, I heard a rustle behind me. My heart dropped. Had they spotted me? I turned, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but it was just a deer, startled by my sudden movement. I let out a shaky breath, reminding myself that I was still in this fight. Meanwhile, far from the chaos of the woods, Detective Mike Thompson sat in his office, staring at a map of the area, red strings connecting various points marked with pins. The tip-off he had received earlier about a potential hideout had ignited a flicker of hope in him. He gathered his team, their faces grim yet resolute. "We're heading into the killing fields," he announced, his voice steady. "We need to find out where these men are operating from. If Sarah is still alive, she could be there." "Are you sure about this, Mike?" one of his colleagues, Jenna, asked, concern etched on her face. "It's dangerous." "Dangerous is what we signed up for," he replied, determination hardening his resolve. "We can't let another girl go missing on our watch. Not again." They prepared themselves, gathering flashlights and weapons as they made their way out to their vehicles. Mike felt the weight of the cold cases pressing down on him, each unsolved murder a ghost whispering in his ear. He wouldn't let Sarah become another statistic. As they drove deeper into the heart of the killing fields, Mike's thoughts drifted to the stories he had heard from survivors. He remembered the fear in their eyes, the haunting memories of their captivity. He couldn't shake the feeling that this time, he was on the cusp of uncovering something bigger than he had ever imagined. "Back in the woods, I was carefully making my way toward what I hoped was the edge of the trees when I heard footsteps behind me. My heart raced, and I turned to see one of the men emerging from the underbrush, a sinister grin spreading across his face. "Where do you think you're going, sweetheart?" he drawled, and in that moment, I understood that my time for outsmarting them had run out. I was trapped. "Get away from me!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the stillness. "Oh, don't worry. You're going to love our little playdate," he sneered, taking a step closer. I had only one option left. I had to fight. With everything I had, I turned and ran, my legs pumping beneath me as I dashed toward the unknown, hoping against hope that help would find me before it was too late. The air was thick with tension as I stood, heart pounding, in the clearing where the men had gathered. Shadows danced around me, and the faint echo of their earlier conversation hung in the air, a taunting reminder of the darkness that had consumed so many lives. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to outsmart them, I had to survive. Suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching on the dry leaves behind me. A figure emerged, and for a moment I thought my heart would stop. But it was Mike, his face etched with determination. "Sarah," he called, his voice low but urgent. I recognized the flicker of hope in his eyes, a spark that made me believe we might actually escape this nightmare. "Mike, you have to go," I whispered fiercely, glancing back toward the two men. They were closer now, their expressions shifting from casual banter to cold realization. "They can't know you're here." "Not a chance," he replied, stepping closer. "You're not alone in this anymore. We'll take them down together." Before I could respond, one of the men turned, locking eyes with us. Well, what do we have here?" he sneered, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Looks like we've caught ourselves a couple of mice." "Get back, Sarah," Mike shouted as he reached for his weapon, but I could feel the weight of my own fear pulling me down. The men advanced, their intentions clear. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage that had carried me this far. "Wait," I shouted, stepping forward. "You think you can get away with this? You're nothing but cowards hiding behind your secrets." I couldn't believe the words spilling from my mouth, but they felt like a lifeline, a way to take control. The men halted, their smirks faltering. "What did you say?" the larger one growled, taking a step closer, his hand twitching toward a knife at his side. "I said you're cowards." I squared my shoulders, finding strength in my anger. "You think you can keep doing this, hurting people? You don't scare me anymore." In that moment, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. Mike caught my gaze, a silent message passing between us. I was ready to fight back. "Let her go," Mike demanded, his voice steady, the authority of a detective radiating from him. "You're surrounded. You won't get out of here." The men exchanged glances, weighing their options. Surrounded? By what? A couple of kids playing hero. The smaller man chuckled, but it was a nervous laugh, and I could sense their confidence waning. In a flash, everything erupted into chaos. The larger man lunged for Mike, but I was quicker. I grabbed a nearby branch and swung it with all my force, striking him across the shoulder. He grunted in surprise, staggering back. "You little, Sarah," Mike shouted, his focus now on the other man who was trying to flank us. I shifted my stance, adrenaline fueling my every movement. "Get behind me," I yelled, feeling the weight of the branch in my hands as I prepared for the next blow. The other man charged toward me, but I was ready. I swung the branch again, this time catching him in the gut. He stumbled, and I seized the opportunity. "Mike, now!" I cried, knowing he was already moving. With a swift motion, Mike tackled the second man, the two of them crashing to the ground. I could hear the scuffle, the sounds of struggle, but I didn't hesitate. I turned my attention to the larger man who was regaining his footing. "Fight me," I yelled, my voice ringing out with defiance. He lunged again, but this time I sidestepped, using the branch to trip him. He fell hard, and I could see the fury in his eyes as he realized I wasn't the helpless victim he thought I was. In the end, it was Mike who secured the handcuffs around the man's wrists, the victory palpable in the air. I stood there, breathless, my heart racing as the reality of what had just happened washed over me. We had fought back, together, against the darkness that had threatened to consume us both. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow across the killing fields, I felt a deep sense of relief mixed with the weight of trauma. We had exposed the truth, but it felt like just the beginning. The betrayal within the department lingered in the air like a heavy fog, and I could sense that there were still many more questions to be answered. "Sarah," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper as he approached me, his eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" "I will be," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "But we have a lot more work to do." The truth was out there, and I was determined to uncover every last secret buried in the killing fields.